The scent of scorched garlic, reduced wine, and premium citrus-scented marble cleaner burned the back of Hazel's throat. It was an expensive smell, a suffocating smell, the sensory definition of her life inside the gated community of Blackwood Ridge, Ohio. A sharp, thunderous crack echoed through the high-ceilinged kitchen as the heavy mahogany front door slammed shut. Julian was home. His footsteps were brisk, measured, and heavy on the dark walnut hardwood floors. A second later, the bitter, medicinal aroma of high-end corporate cologne sliced through the humid air of the kitchen like a razor blade. He did not look at her. He never looked at her anymore. With a practiced, dismissive flick of his wrist, he tossed his leather designer briefcase onto the white quartz kitchen island. It struck the stone with a dull, heavy thud that made Hazel's shoulders instinctively tense. "You're still wearing that pathetic apron," Julian said. His voice was flat, dropping into the room like dry ice, instantly freezing whatever warmth remained in the air. He didn't wait for an answer. He loosened the knot of his lavender silk tie with his left hand while his right thumb scrolled furiously across the glowing screen of his phone. "My mother called this afternoon. The corporate gala is in exactly 48 hours. Hazel. The board of directors is executing a massive audit on Vance Medical next week, and I need you looking like a proper executive wife, not an exhausted, low-rent daycare worker." Hazel's fingers tightened around the cold, stainless steel edge of the sink until her knuckles turned a stark, bloodless white. Her palms were still raw, burning from a long afternoon spent scrubbing plastic building blocks and tiny chairs with industrial bleach at the public preschool down in the valley. She had spent the last 3 hours standing over the stove, carefully searing beef chuck, peeling pearl onions, and reducing a bottle of Pinot Noir to create his favorite traditional beef bourguignon. But standing here now, the rich, savory aroma felt like lead in her lungs. 7 years. 7 long, agonizingly quiet years of marriage had whittled her life down to this very spot. She had become a ghost, a silent domestic shadow operating efficiently in the background of a wealthy man's unyielding ambition. Her bachelor's degree in interior and environmental design, the one she had graduated with at the top of her class, was currently rotting inside a dusty cardboard box in the master bedroom closet, buried deep beneath Julian's old tax documents and dry-cleaning plastic. "Did you hear a single word I just said?" Julian snapped. He finally snapped his head up, his gaze locking onto her. His eyes were cold, calculating, and predatory. It was the same look he gave underperforming suppliers during quarterly reviews. He was measuring her worth in seconds, and she was failing the metric. "Eleanor already went ahead and hired a professional stylist for you. They will be here tomorrow at 10 sharp. You will wear the dress they choose. You will stand precisely 6 inches to my left. You will smile flawlessly for the corporate cameras, and you will say absolutely, unconditionally nothing." The sheer weight of his icy withdrawal, the quiet, textbook emotional abuse he used like a scalpel, chilled the room faster than the autumn wind outside. To the prestigious Vance family, Hazel Miller was not a human being with an internal world, dreams, or a beating heart. She was merely an invisible asset. She was a convenient, low-maintenance prop to be polished, dressed in silk, and displayed neatly on a stage whenever the corporate stock prices began to waver. Hazel slowly looked down at the dark, polished surface of the quartz counter. In the glossy, mirror-like reflection of the stone, she could barely recognize the woman staring back at her. The dull, submissive light in her own eyes suddenly terrified her to the core. But then, beneath the layers of exhausting compliance, a tiny, buried spark of cold fury flickered to life. Without uttering a single syllable, she turned off the burner beneath the bubbling pot. She did not serve the dinner. She did not clean the counter. She calmly walked away from the stove, slipped past her husband without making eye contact, and stepped into the dim light of the hallway closet. Her hands were steady as she reached deep into her coat pocket, pulled out her personal phone, and dialed a number she had not permitted herself to touch in years. To truly understand how a woman with a brilliant, artistic mind allowed herself to be reduced to a ghost in her own home, we must step entirely away from this suffocating suburban mansion. We must travel back 7 months into the past, into the crisp, bitter air of early spring, where the very first cracks in Hazel's silence began to take shape. The sharp, earthy scent of aged pine wood, stale tobacco, and damp wool always filled Arthur's tiny, one-story house in the working-class district of Dayton. Outside the frost-rimmed windows, a biting Ohio wind rattled the loose glass panes, whistling through the old oak trees. Inside, the only sounds were the slow, rhythmic ticking of a cheap plastic wall clock and the heavy, uneven thud of Arthur's limping footsteps. Hazel sat silently at the worn, scratched oak kitchen table. She had driven her battered 2005 Ford F-150 across the county line in total silence, her mind spinning. Just 3 hours ago, Julian had discovered she was still donating a portion of her small preschool paycheck to a local children's shelter. In retaliation, he had quietly frozen their joint bank accounts, leaving her stranded at a gas station with a declined debit card. The public humiliation was a physical weight, a cold, suffocating pressure settling deep in her chest. Arthur hobbled slowly into the small kitchen, his breathing slightly labored as he carried 2 heavy, ceramic mugs of black coffee. His right knee, ruined by decades of walking concrete steps as a postal carrier, clicked loudly with every single step he took. It was a sharp, mechanical sound that made Hazel's throat ache with familiarity. He set the mugs down on the table, the dark, bitter liquid sloshing dangerously against the rims. His hands, massive and heavily calloused from a lifetime of sorting mail for the United States Postal Service, were shaking with a fine, uncontrollable tremor. "You look entirely too thin, Hazelnut," Arthur said softly, using the childhood nickname that always made her feel safe. He reached into the front pocket of his faded, heavy flannel shirt. With deliberate slowness, he pulled out a thick, rectangular parcel wrapped in coarse brown butcher paper, followed by a small, heavily scratched brass pocket compass. He pushed both items gently across the table until they rested against her cold fingers. "What is this, Dad?" Hazel asked, her voice barely a whisper over the ticking clock. $4,800, Arthur said, his lips twitching into a brave, stubborn smile. The deep wrinkles around his tired eyes crinkled with warmth. "I got incredibly lucky with a scratch-off lottery ticket at the Speedway station down the road yesterday morning. And that compass, that belonged to your mother. I want you to take all of it. Hazel, I want you to go online tonight and sign up for that advanced environmental design and spatial therapy certification program you couldn't stop talking about last Christmas." Hazel stared down at the dull brass compass. The aged metal was cool to the touch, smelling faintly of old coins, machine oil, and lake salt. Her aunt, the wonderful, fierce woman who had legally raised her alongside Arthur through the kinship care program after her biological mother abandoned her, had kept that exact compass mounted to the console of their old, beat-up aluminum fishing boat. Hazel knew every single indentation and scratch on its surface by heart. She slowly picked up the heavy brown paper parcel. The paper was crisp, rattling loudly in the quiet room. But as she lifted it, a tiny, torn scrap of white paper fell out from beneath the twine. It was a formal receipt from a marine dealer over in Springfield. The truth hit her like a physical blow. There was no lottery ticket. Arthur had spent his morning hitching his beloved 19-foot green-striped aluminum fishing boat to his truck. He had sold the very last physical memory of his late wife, the one thing that connected him to his old life, just to get this money. Hazel looked up quickly. Arthur had already turned his face away from her. He was staring intensely out the window at the gray, unyielding Ohio sky, his jaw set tight. His large shoulders sagged heavily beneath his shirt. He looked so much smaller than the giant who used to carry her on his shoulders. He was absolutely terrified. He was plagued by the agonizing belief that his poverty was a cage for her, that his empty pockets and meager retirement checks were a barrier preventing his daughter from standing equal to the wealthy family she had married into. Hazel did not cry. She did not scream about the staggering cruelty of the Vance family, nor did she curse the coldness of her husband. The paralyzing self-pity left her body in a single, sharp exhale, replaced instantly by something diamond-hard, terrifyingly clear, and functional. She reached across the scratched oak table. Her smooth, small hand firmly covered Arthur's trembling, scarred fingers. She pulled the old brass compass toward her chest, flipped open her laptop, and opened the browser. The keys clacked sharply, a fast, military rhythm cutting through the silent house. She opened the university portal, navigated to the advanced design program, typed in her personal details, and entered the routing numbers from the cash deposit. She hit the submit button. The laptop screen flashed a brilliant, blinding white, illuminating the fierce, unyielding determination carved into her face. Hazel stood up cleanly. She did not offer a dramatic speech. She walked straight to the hallway closet, pulled on a pair of thick, insulated leather work gloves, and grabbed a bucket of white exterior paint she had purchased months ago. She walked out onto the cold porch, leaving the suffocating warmth of the house behind, and began to forcefully scrub the winter grime off the rusty tailgate of her old truck, preparing it for the work ahead. The sharp, sour smell of spilled milk, washable paint, and industrial floor wax defined Hazel's days at the public preschool. She spent her mornings on her knees, wiping down low plastic tables and collecting abandoned toys, her lower back aching fiercely under the harsh glare of flickering fluorescent lights. But by night, the crisp, stimulating aroma of strong black coffee and graphite took over her reality. Her small spare bedroom in the apartment she secretly rented under her maiden name smelled of fresh ink, high-end printing paper, and electronic screen cleaner. The rapid, ceaseless click-clack of her mechanical keyboard beat a steady, aggressive rhythm into the dark midnight silence. Hazel had completely stopped reacting to Julian's psychological warfare. When he walked past her in their massive house without a word, she no longer looked up to check his expression. When he openly mocked her low preschool salary at dinner, his voice became nothing more than background noise, like the distant hum of an old, failing refrigerator. She had shifted her mindset entirely. She was no longer a victim enduring a bad marriage. She was a strategist executing an exit plan. Her transformation was driven by ruthless daily actions. First, she reclaimed her physical autonomy. She woke up every morning at 5 o'clock sharp, forcing her lungs to burn as she ran through the crisp, foggy streets of the valley. She went to a local salon and had her long, heat-damaged hair chopped into a sharp, asymmetrical, chin-length bob that framed her face with clean, severe, and modern architectural lines. She began tracking every single dollar from her paycheck on a complex, encrypted spreadsheet, separating her financial identity completely from the Vance family empire. Next, she weaponized her education. For her thesis project in the Advanced Design Certification Program, Hazel took a massive risk. She chose to completely redesign the dilapidated, concrete playground of her public preschool. Working through the weekends until her fingers bled, she painted the towering brick walls in deep, soothing terracotta blues and muted, earth-toned greens. She designed custom wooden structures and constructed sensory paths filled with crushed lavender, cedar mulch, and smooth river stones. The space was transformed from a sterile cage into a therapeutic sanctuary designed to lower cortisol levels in traumatized children. 2 weeks before the gala, the project unexpectedly won the prestigious State Design Award for Therapeutic Educational Spaces. Her full name, Hazel Miller, was printed in bold, black ink on the front page of the regional morning paper. But as her public value grew, a much darker corporate reality surfaced in the background. Hazel had begun holding secret midnight meetings with Valerie Stone, a sharp, aggressive corporate attorney whose private office smelled of expensive leather, old paper, and stale espresso. Valerie had been quietly digging through the unredacted financial filings of Vance Holdings ahead of the federal audit. What Valerie uncovered was a legal bombshell. Julian's late father had established a massive, multimillion-dollar independent trust fund years ago, hidden behind a web of shell corporations. Under Ohio marital property laws, because Hazel had been married to Julian for 7 years and had documented extensive, non-monetary design consultations for the firm's early medical clinics, she was the absolute legal co-owner of that specific trust. Julian and Eleanor knew the upcoming audit would force this fund into the light. The cold shoulder, the brutal, icy isolation they had subjected her to, was a calculated corporate tactic to shatter her self-esteem, forcing her to sign a pre-written, restrictive divorce settlement before she ever realized her true worth. Hazel sat quietly in the cab of her old truck after her Friday shift, the smell of rain-soaked asphalt rising from the pavement. A sharp, high-pitched chime broke the silence. Her phone screen lit up, casting a cold, ghostly blue glow across her face. It was a text message from Julian. The attachment was a crystal-clear, high-resolution photo of him sitting intimately close to a young, wealthy heiress at an exclusive rooftop bar in downtown Chicago. Below the photo, Julian's text read, "Have you finally thought about the Chicago apartment? Sign the paperwork tonight. Don't make me lose my patience. Hazel, you have nothing without us." Hazel looked at the image. She waited for the old, familiar sting of rejection, the hot flush of shame, or the urge to cry. Nothing came. Her heart rate remained perfectly steady. She looked at the man in the photo and saw only an amateur adversary who had underestimated his opponent. She calmly forwarded the screenshot directly to Valerie Stone's secure server, typed a short, forward reply to her husband, and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. Her reply was simple: "See you at the gala." She turned the key in the ignition. The old Ford engine roared to life with a loud, mechanical rumble, and Hazel shifted the truck into drive, watching her headlights cut through the gathering darkness. The suffocating scent of thousands of imported white lilies, expensive French perfume, and heavy floor wax hung like a thick cloud in the air of the grand ballroom at the Blackstone Hotel in downtown Chicago. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the ornate, gold-leaf ceilings, pouring a blinding, brilliant white light over a sprawling sea of dark Italian suits, silk evening gowns, and diamond necklaces. Hundreds of the Midwest's most prominent investors, politicians, and corporate board members stood shoulder to shoulder, the low, collective murmur of their voices mixing with the sharp, rhythmic clinking of crystal champagne flutes. Near the back wall, high-definition television cameras from major financial news networks stood on elevated platforms, their red recording lights glowing like tiny warning eyes. Eleanor Vance stood at the absolute center of the elevated stage. Her posture was iron stiff, her corporate smile painted onto her face with mathematical precision. She adjusted the microphone attached to the podium, a brief, metallic hum vibrating through the massive wall-mounted speakers. To her left stood Julian, impeccably dressed in a bespoke tuxedo, slowly smoothing his platinum cufflinks. His face practically glowed with a restless, arrogant energy. The federal audit was scheduled for Tuesday morning, and the family desperately needed this night to be a flawless, public display of stability to protect the dropping stock prices of Vance Holdings. Tonight, we celebrate more than just 70 years of medical innovation. Eleanor's voice boomed through the ballroom, smooth, practiced, and dripping with artificial warmth. We celebrate the foundational strength of the Vance family. We celebrate the quiet, unseen devotion that allows our leaders to thrive. I want to invite my daughter-in-law, Hazel, to join us on stage, a young woman who has gracefully supported my son from the quiet shadows of our home. At that exact moment, two large security guards in black suits pushed open the heavy, double mahogany doors at the rear of the ballroom. The crowd turned. The cameras swung around in perfect unison. Hazel walked into the room. She wore a floor-length, backless black gown. It had no designer labels, no glittering sequins, and no lace. She had spent the last 3 nights designing, cutting, and sewing the midweight silk herself. The clean, severe, structural lines of the black fabric contrasted sharply against the pale skin of her neck and the modern, geometric lines of her short haircut. She walked with slow, fluid, and deliberate steps. She wore absolutely none of the diamond jewelry Eleanor had ordered her to wear. She looked striking, dangerous, and entirely calm, like a sleek obsidian blade cutting through a room full of gilded glass. Julian's manufactured smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his eyes widening slightly as he noticed her short hair and her commanding posture. Through the towering, 30-foot glass walls of the ballroom, the outdoor spotlights illuminated a silver Ferrari parked on a raised platform near the red carpet. A thick, blood-red silk ribbon stretched tightly across its polished hood. A corporate assistant stepped onto the stage, holding a velvet-lined red box containing a titanium key fob, alongside a thick, cream-colored leather folder. As a profound token of our family's deep gratitude, Eleanor announced to the crowd, her arm gesturing grandly toward the glass wall, and to ensure our family moves forward into its next chapter with total privacy and mutual respect, we present this gift to Hazel. A new beginning. Julian stepped forward to meet her at the podium, unscrewing the cap of a heavy, solid gold fountain pen. He held it out toward her, his fingers steady, but his eyes drilling into hers with a silent, desperate threat. Sign the non-disclosure agreement hidden inside the folder. Take the $250,000 car. Take the apartment in Chicago. Vanish quietly into the dark, his eyes commanded. The television cameras zoomed in on Hazel's face. The entire room waited for the quiet, submissive schoolteacher to accept the wealth and curtsy. Hazel stepped up to the microphone. The sharp, metallic click of her heels against the wooden stage sounded like a sequence of small gunshots in the sudden silence. She reached out and took the cream-colored folder, but with a slow, deliberate movement, she pushed Julian's gold pen away with the tip of her index finger. The heavy pen rolled across the wood and struck the base of the microphone with a loud, metallic clink. My husband believes a silver Ferrari can buy 7 years of my disappearance, Hazel said. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a terrifying, resonant clarity that cut through the massive ballroom like a winter gale. She did not yell. She did not tremble. The sheer, unyielding weight of her composure made the entire audience freeze. He believes a luxury car can erase the fact that he used cold shoulder, deliberate, systematically calculated emotional isolation to render me invisible in my own home while he committed corporate adultery with his business partners. A massive, collective gasp rippled through the crowded room. Julian's face instantly drained of all color, turning a sickening shade of ash gray. Eleanor lunged forward to grab the microphone, her eyes wild with fury, but Hazel stepped into her path, her body blocking the podium with rigid strength. My mother-in-law believes a pre-written, restrictive divorce agreement can bury the truth before the federal audit on Tuesday, Hazel continued, looking directly into the lenses of the television cameras. I accept this luxury vehicle tonight because it is my absolute, legally verified right under the marital property laws of this state. And right now, on this stage, I am executing a legally binding quitclaim deed to transfer this asset entirely to the Ohio Alliance for Foster Youth and Battered Women. Right on cue, the heavy doors at the back of the room opened for a second time. Valerie Stone walked briskly down the center aisle, her heavy leather boots echoing loudly. Her silver briefcase snapped open, with a sharp, deafening click that echoed off the high ceilings. She stepped onto the stage and handed a thick stack of court-stamped legal documents directly to Eleanor Vance and the horrified corporate lawyers. As of exactly 5 minutes ago, Valerie announced, her voice ringing with legal authority, the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas has issued an emergency asset freezing injunction against the entire Vance Family Independent Trust Fund due to documented evidence of illegal marital asset dissipation and fraud. The ballroom instantly erupted into absolute, chaotic madness. Financial journalists began shouting questions. Dozens of flashbulbs went wild, capturing Julian's panicked, sweating face and Eleanor's cracking, ruined composure. Julian lunged forward, his fingers gripping Hazel's upper arm with terrifying force. "Hazel, stop this goddamn madness right now," he hissed, his hot breath smelling faintly of expensive sour wine and panic. Hazel stopped. She slowly looked down at his fingers, squeezing her arm. She did not flinch, she did not hurt, and she did not feel fear. She looked back up into his eyes with a cold, hollow detachment that was entirely absolute. With a sharp, effortless twist of her shoulder, she broke his grip instantly. She turned her back on the stage, leaving the cream-colored folder on the podium. She reached down, unbuckled the straps of her painful $1,000 designer high heels, picked them up in one hand, and walked barefoot down the stage stairs. She pushed cleanly through the sea of stunned billionaires, exited the grand glass lobby, and walked straight out into the cold night air toward the dark corner of the street where the old, dented 2005 Ford F-150 truck was waiting, its engine idling with a loud, comforting, and earth-shaking rumble. The sharp, nostalgic smell of gasoline, old vinyl seats, and dried coffee grounds filled the warm cabin of the 2005 Ford F-150. Outside the truck windows, the pitch-black Ohio night completely swallowed the rolling hills of the countryside. The heavy, rhythmic hum of the massive all-terrain tires against the cracked asphalt of Interstate 71 created a deep, steady vibration that traveled up through the floorboards. Arthur sat rigidly behind the steering wheel, his large, scarred knuckles turning white as he gripped the plastic casing. His breathing was shallow, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Every few seconds, his eyes darted nervously toward the passenger seat, where Hazel sat in total stillness, staring out at the passing dark. The soft, green glow of the dashboard lights illuminated the clean, severe lines of her short haircut. Arthur's large hands began to shake violently against the wheel. The old truck cabin, usually so comforting, suddenly felt suffocatingly small. He reached deep into the pocket of his faded, blue USPS winter jacket, the heavy nylon fabric rustling loudly in the quiet space. He pulled out a crumpled, stained white envelope. His thick fingers fumbled with the paper for a long moment before he set it down on the plastic center console between them. "Hazelnut," Arthur said, his voice cracking sharply, thick with 7 years of unshed tears and heavy regret. He did not look at her. He kept his eyes locked on the white lines of the highway. "I saw the news cameras on the TV in the lobby. I saw those people in their tuxedos. I saw the car. I only managed to save this $300 from my monthly pension check after paying the property taxes. I am so incredibly sorry, baby." Hazel slowly turned her head. She looked down at the crumpled white envelope resting on the plastic. Then she looked up at the profile of her father. "I was terrified tonight, Hazel," Arthur whispered, his jaw tightening until the muscles shook. A single tear rolled down into the deep, weathered wrinkles of his cheek. I am an old, broken-down mailman. My knees click when I walk. My pockets are empty. For 7 years, I have been plagued by the agonizing fear that my poverty was the reason you stayed in that house. I thought you would look at their millions, look at their Ferraris, and realize your old dad had absolutely nothing to give you. Hazel did not cry. She did not feel the familiar, crushing weight of sadness or resentment. Instead, an immense, solid, and grounding warmth flooded her entire body. She reached out with a steady hand and picked up the crumpled envelope. The rough paper felt real, heavy, and authentic between her fingertips. She did not open the envelope to look at the $300. Instead, she leaned forward toward the dashboard. A small, yellowed piece of notebook paper was taped next to the old radio. It was the list she had written nearly a year ago, tracking Arthur's daily blood pressure medication schedule. Hazel peeled the old tape off the plastic with a soft, sticky sound. She flipped the paper over to its clean, white side. She pulled a thick black marker from her purse. The tip of the marker scratched boldly and aggressively against the paper as the old truck cruised through the dark Ohio night. She wrote 3 clean, unyielding lines. Arthur's duty, keep being my father. Hazel's duty, remind Dad to take his medication. Terms of agreement, forever. No corporate interference allowed. She pressed the paper firmly back onto the dashboard, smoothing it down with the flat of her thumb until the tape stuck fast. Arthur glanced down at the bold black writing during a red light. The immense tension in his massive shoulders visibly melted away. The tight, defensive line of his mouth softened into a faint, trembling smile. He let out a long, shuddering breath, exhaling the crushing guilt he had carried silently for 7 years. Hazel leaned her head gently against the cool glass of the passenger window. The dark, wild Ohio trees blurred past them in the night. The blinding glare of the city lights and the corporate towers was far behind them. She closed her eyes, listening to the steady, powerful, and deeply comforting rumble of the old truck engine, knowing exactly who she was. The heavy, comforting scent of fried grease, burnt sugar, and cheap hazelnut coffee hung like smoke in the air at Rusty's diner. Outside the wide windows, a cold spring rain tapped a steady, soft rhythm against the fogged glass panes. 6 long, exhausting months had passed since the night of the Blackstone Gala. The legal war was finally over. The Vance Family Trust Fund had been dismantled by the courts. The federal audit had completely wrecked the stock prices of Vance Holdings, and Julian had been officially stripped of his executive title and removed from the board by the investors. Hazel sat quietly in a corner vinyl booth, its dark red surface cracked and smoothed down by decades of working-class customers. Across the Formica table from her sat Eleanor Vance. The physical change in the older woman was staggering. The sharp, tailored designer suits and the heavy gold jewelry were completely gone. Eleanor wore a simple, unbranded navy knit sweater and a plain tan trench coat. Her silver hair was pulled back neatly into a low bun, but it lacked the stiff, frozen perfection of her past corporate life. The cold, impenetrable mask of the Vance matriarch had cracked open, leaving behind a woman who looked deeply tired, but oddly grounded, as if she had finally stopped running. The board of directors officially forced Julian out of the building yesterday morning, Eleanor said. Her voice entirely lacked its old, sharp, and cutting edge. It was quiet, blending easily into the clatter of porcelain plates and the low murmurs of truckers eating breakfast in the background. She looked down into her white ceramic mug, her fingers tracing the rim. The dark coffee inside rippled slightly. I spent nearly 3 decades wrapping this family in gold, steel, and lies to protect a name. In the end, I wasn't protecting my son, Hazel. I was just protecting my own pathetic fear of being perceived as a failure. I am truly sorry. For all of it. Hazel looked steadily at the woman who had once tried to render her invisible. She did not feel a sudden surge of cruel triumph. She did not feel the need to hurl insults, demand answers, or remind Eleanor of the agonizing years of cold shoulder. The destructive anger had burned out of her system months ago, leaving her mind completely clear, sharp, and unburdened. She had entirely stepped out of the role of the victim. She was a businesswoman, now, controlling her own space. "I accept your apology, Eleanor," Hazel said. Her words were short, clean, and perfectly even. "But we need to establish absolute, non-negotiable boundaries moving forward." Eleanor raised her eyes, her face calm, listening with genuine attention. "You and Julian will never enter the city limits of Dayton," Hazel stated, her voice projecting an absolute, calm authority that required no shouting. "You will never attempt to contact my father again. And you will never use your remaining wealth or your family name to manipulate my life or my design business. Our paths are completely separate now." Eleanor did not argue. She did not threaten to call her corporate attorneys. She simply nodded once, a slow, heavy gesture of genuine acceptance. She reached into her trench coat pocket and pulled out a small, plain white card. She slid it gently across the Formica table until it touched Hazel's coffee saucer. It had a single phone number written in dark blue ink. "This is my private, personal line," Eleanor whispered, her voice softening into something real. "No corporate assistance. No public relations filters. I heard about the new educational design studio you are launching in Columbus next month. If you ever need an independent consultant who knows how corporate boards operate, call me, not as a Vance, just as an older woman who deeply respects the work you are doing." Hazel looked down at the card. The blue ink was sharp and clear against the white paper. She did not promise to call. She did not dramatically tear the card to pieces. She calmly picked it up, opened her leather purse, and slid it into the side pocket, closing the zipper with a crisp, decisive snap. The warm, heavy golden light of late afternoon completely flooded the western shores of Indian Lake. The fresh spring air smelled of damp pine needles, wet moss, and the crisp, clean scent of open water. The gentle, continuous lap of small waves against the old wooden dock created a rhythmic, deeply soothing sound that echoed under the pier. Hazel stood proudly at the absolute edge of the wooden pier. She looked incredibly vibrant, full of life. Her sharp, short haircut caught the deep orange glow of the setting sun, making the strands look like spun copper. She wore simple canvas deck shoes, dark jeans, and a light utility jacket, moving with total freedom, physical ease, and quiet pride. The heavy, exhausting burden of her past life inside the Vance mansion had vanished completely from her posture. She was now the successful, self-made director of her own independent educational design firm, completely self-reliant, free, and highly respected in her field. She had already used her very first legal settlement check to completely pay off the remaining mortgage on Arthur's house in Dayton, clearing away his lifelong financial stress in a single morning. But today was not about legal victories or money. Hazel turned and gestured grandly toward the water below. Tied securely to the heavy wooden pylons of the dock was a brand-new 19-foot aluminum fishing boat. Its clean, polished silver hull cut beautifully through the calm lake water, and its powerful new outboard motor gleamed brightly under the golden rays of the sun. Arthur walked up slowly to stand beside her, his old leather-work boots thumping softly on the wooden planks of the pier. He stopped dead in his tracks, his jaw dropping instantly as he stared down at the magnificent vessel. His breath caught in his throat. He reached into his flannel shirt pocket with a trembling hand and pulled out the old, heavily scratched brass pocket compass he had kept from his late wife's sold boat. His thumb gently traced the worn, familiar metal. Hazel took the brass compass from his hand. The cool metal felt incredibly solid and real in her palm. Pulling a small stainless steel screwdriver from her utility jacket, she knelt down on the deck of the new boat. With slow, precise movements, she mounted the old brass compass directly onto the center of the new boat's steering console. The metal screws clicked perfectly and securely into place with a definitive snap. "Dad sold his anchor, so I could have my sails," Hazel said softly in her native tongue, her voice perfectly steady, rich, and full of deep, unconditional love. "Now I'm taking you home." Arthur looked down at the mounted compass, then out at the vast, open expanse of the calm water. A brilliant, tearful, and incredibly beautiful smile broke across his weathered, wrinkled face. He stepped firmly onto the boat, his movements surprisingly light and full of energy. They spent the next 2 hours drifting slowly on the calm, glass-like surface of Indian Lake. They did not catch a single fish all afternoon, but their shared laughter drifted easily across the open water, mixing with the gentle hum of the evening wind. The silence between them was no longer crowded, heavy, or tense with hidden fears. It was completely, beautifully peaceful. Before the sun dipped entirely below the horizon, Hazel stepped back onto the grassy shore. She pulled out her phone. Arthur stood proudly by the side of his old, dented 2005 Ford F-150 truck, which was parked near the gravel boat ramp. The old truck's faded, scratched paint glowed with a deep, heroic warmth in the final golden rays of the day. Arthur leaned his massive frame against the rusty tailgate, smiling broadly with his arms crossed over his chest, looking like the king of the valley. The camera shutter clicked sharply in the quiet air. That single, unedited photograph would soon sit in a simple wooden frame directly on the fireplace mantel of their new home. Visitors who came to her design studio would often ask why there were no pictures of luxury estates, high-stakes courtrooms, or the grand corporate galas of Chicago on her walls. Hazel's answer always remained incredibly simple. Those intense corporate battles had merely altered the trajectory of her financial future. The old, rusty Ford truck and the smiling, weathered man standing proudly beside it reminded her exactly who had carried her soul safely through the storm. All shadows must fade before the truth, and every pain is simply the start of a beautiful rebirth. Always remember, the right to write a new chapter of your life is forever in your hands. Please like, share, and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Hope to see you on the next page.